Hey, I see you came back, and this is Pop Prevention Over Prescriptions, where we are focusing on opioids. And so in this episode, we'll talk about how opioids work, their effects, and then we'll equip you with some terms so you can know what they mean. And also, when you're out telling all your friends about what you learned about opioids, you'll be able to talk and give them some cool terms that really show that you know what you're talking about and what opioids really are and why you're choosing to prevent over prescribe. So now we'll talk about how opioids work. And so opioids affect your nerve cells. And so those are called neurons, something you might be learning in biology. And they are in your brain and your body. And they tell your brain to block pain. And so they also make you feel calm and happy. And so when you have all these little, we'll just call them, look like little M&Ms or Skittles, and they all go to the receptor, and the neuron sits and grabs. And so that what the opioid does is stop it from recepting, and so it doesn't cause pain, and they shoot out calm signals instead in your brain. And so this is all neurological, and so it all happens right up here, and it goes from pain to making you feel happy all in a matter of seconds. How cool is science when you're using it in the right way, right? Cool. And so we'll go into some opioid effects. And so some of those short-term effects of opioids are what we just talked about: feelings of being calm and relaxed, sleepy, but sometimes you can also be confused. And that's why, of course, we want to make sure we're not misusing them and not following what the doctor wants us to do on the pills. And so it also causes slowed or stopped breathing, which is fatal in overdose. And that's one of the things we talked about in the last video of what some of our illegal opioids do, but as well as our prescribed opioids. Either nauseating or vomiting feelings you can also have as well, and sometimes constipation. Constipation meaning you can't go do number 2 in the bathroom. So again, if you don't want to feel calm or sleepy or confused, more importantly, slowed or stopped breathing, nausea or vomiting, and also constipation, that's why you have to be careful when you're taking them and make sure you're following what the doctor prescribes you in the right dosage amounts. Now, unfortunately, opioids do have long-term effects, and that's why you have to follow what the doctor says. And if you feel better and you haven't taken all your pills, don't continue to take the rest of your medication because you might not need it, because some of the long-term effects are quite worse than some of the short-term effects that we just talked about. And so some long-term effects can be addiction, heart infection, lung infection, and muscle pain. And so addiction is the top one, and it's why opioids are such a hot thing and most talked about now. And so when you're addicted to something, it's really hard to get away from it. You crave it, you want it, even when you don't need it. And it might be affecting your body and damaging you, but you can't help that fact that you want it so bad. It's more like a craving, a really, really bad craving, if you want to talk about what addiction is in just simple terms. But heart infection can really damage your heart, something that your heart might not survive from, or it might be permanently damaged. Also, in a lung infection, something where you're not able to breathe properly. So damaging really, really vital organs. We all know we need our lungs to breathe and our heart to pump blood to our entire body and bring it back to oxygenated again. Okay, this is not a biology class, but I love biology, so I have to give it to you. And muscle pain. And sometimes, even though it's supposed to stop pain, it causes pain if you're using it for some amount of time over what your doctor prescribes. So that's an adverse effect, and why you shouldn't use opioids past what you're supposed to. So that is you preventing over prescribing and using prescriptions. And so we'll talk about terms next. Stay tuned. So the first term is tolerance. And tolerance is a reduced response to a drug with repeated use. So if you're steady using opioids over and over again past what the doctor prescribes, you'll become tolerant, and then you'll need more to make you feel the same feeling you felt before, unless, if that makes sense. So you become tolerant to amounts that once before cured your problem. So the next term is overdose. And so overdose is injury to the body, which is like poisoning it, that happens when drugs are taken in excess amounts, large sums. And an overdose can be fatal or non-fatal. And an overdose, when you typically are non-fatal, some type of stimulant is given to you. Normally may look like an EpiPen, which you take when you are looking like you are allergic to peanuts or something, and they inject it in you and you come back from your overdose really quickly in a matter of seconds. That's miracle and life-saving, but we don't want to get to the point where we're excessively using and poisoning our body. Next term up is drug misuse. And so this is the use of illegal drugs or drugs that are used for prescription in a matter other than that what is directed from your doctor, and in large amounts, mostly greater than what they're expected and also longer than what they're supposed to be used for as well by your doctor, and you're taking, or if you're even taking someone else's prescriptions. So that's drug misuse. Another term is drug addiction, and mostly preferred term is substance use disorder. And in this terms, where we're speaking on opioids, we call this an opioid use disorder. Now that switch from opioid abuse and just use. So opioid use disorders, or OUDs, and drug addiction is preferred to be called substance use disorders, or SUD. So we talked about what the term drug addiction means, but it's preferred to be called a substance use disorder. And so particularly opioid use disorders has its own term as well. And so it's a problematic pattern for opioid use that causes significant impairment or distress and changes in your life. You have to have a diagnosis, and it's based on specific criteria, which has unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control your use of opioids. And it's resulting in some sort of social problem and a failure to fulfill obligations on a normal basis that you could have before dealing with work, home, school, or your friends. And so opioid use disorder is preferred far more over opioid abuse or opioid dependent, and definitely opioid addiction. Our final term is physical dependence, which is the adaptation of a drug that produces symptoms of withdrawal when stopped. And so we talked about tolerance, and we talked about drug addiction, which is preferred to be used as opioid use disorder or substance use disorder. And so those are totally different from physical dependence, which produces its own symptoms when you stop using the drug. So different from tolerance or addiction.